Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be returning to Upfront and I'm going to pick up on an intriguing suggestion I received from one of you that I try looking at the campaign rules in Upfront. Now, I must confess, although I have tried the campaign rules before, a few years back I started to run a British campaign set in the Far Eastern Theatre. I didn't really stick with it for various reasons, and nothing to do with the fact that it wasn't enjoyable. It was just a bit time consuming, and at that particular time, I didn't really have the ability to give it the attention it deserved. So it's actually great for me to revisit the campaign rules because I have not touched them for a good few years, but I do remember that they were quite absorbing and very, very fun. So, as it's the 80th anniversary of, well, effectively it's August 1942 if you go by these things, I thought it would be very interesting to run a Soviet campaign. So what I've done is I've printed off a campaign roster. And one of the great things about how campaigns work in Upfront is that you can generally choose whoever you want as long as you conform to the standard rules about your squad size. You obviously have to have a squad leader and an assistant squad leader, and but you can either set yourself a points value or you can adapt the scenarios that you choose to play. There's an awful lot of flexibility in the system, and of course, the pre-printed campaign sheets, there's one for each nationality, give you a lot of options for how you want to compose your force. Now, as it's August 1942, so to speak, I have decided that I am going to play a group of freshly raised Russian troops. I'm afraid there were all too many of those at this point in the war, so I'm going to make this quite a short campaign. I'm really only going to play two scenarios in it, one of which is a two-parter. So I have my force here, and this squad is based on the list for the elite troops on the attack scenario from the Upfront core game. And what happens in elite troops on the attack is that a defending player, in this case me, has to start with inexperienced troops. So the Russians will begin as conscripts, and that has an impact on how effective their hand is. Also, there's a slightly higher than normal number of not exactly low morale troops, but middle to lower morale. And we will come under attack from German elite infantry. Now, although the Germans are listed as being SS for their elite troops, in sticking with the approaches to Stalingrad, it's more likely these will be Panzer Grenadiers, so still enough to give me a hard time. So, following the list that is given in the scenario lineup, I have filled out the campaign sheet for my squad. Now, all you need worry about to begin with is to record the basics, what their rank is, what their KIA rating is. It's 8 for everyone to begin with. It becomes important later if the gaps in your ranks have to be filled by even greener and less experienced troops. Those poor fellows always begin with a KIA value of 7. And then, of course, you record each man's morale and panic values. Now, the reason you do that is as an aide memoire, because as you can see, there are columns for elan, survival, and promotion. Now, depending on how a scenario goes, you keep a running tally of heroic things your man might do. So, for example, if you infiltrate an enemy position and open fire on them, doubling your firepower, of course. If you successfully pin or kill any of the men in the defending group, you instantly get a number of elan points based on the size of the group you infiltrated and whether they were pinned or unpinned. And there's various other situations as listed in the rules where your men can earn elan points. These, along with surviving a scenario, and building up promotion points can gradually allow you to improve your character. Now, the Elan and survival bits allow you to gradually up your morale and panic rating. So, of course, the more experienced you get, the more confident a soldier you become. If you're a green replacement with a KIA value of 7, if you accumulate enough of those, you can bump up to 8. Your sense of survival has obviously increased a little bit. And each time your morale and panic ratings are increased through experience or Elan points, you also build up a bank of promotion points. So eventually, some of you can be up for promotion. This is quite handy because if your NCOs are killed off in a scenario and you don't have reinforcements available, that can be tricky. Now, there are mechanisms for filling the gaps, but it's entirely the player's discretion whether you use them or not. The way I'm going to play my Eastern Front scenarios, because of the sheer brutality of the fighting and the inefficiency of the Soviet commissariat, I'm going to assume that every man on this list that I'm not using is available as an immediate replacement. But if I suffer casualties beyond that and I'm not able to replace them, then I will just fight the subsequent engagements with a smaller number of men, and God help me. So that very broadly is how a campaign works. You start your roster sheet. You play through the pre-designated scenarios you're going to play, and over time you watch your men build up experience. Some will turn out to be heroes, others may be a bit less inspiring but would be pretty good at surviving, and then there are those, unfortunately, who just will not make it. And the campaign game is great this way because it's really, really immersive. And as I've said before in some of my other upfront videos, you get really quite emotionally invested in these guys, especially if you've been through a few missions with these individuals almost, and you want them to do well. When you play the campaign, you really start to care. Or you certainly, let me put it a different way, you really get immersed in your squad, and you want your guys to do well, and you want to try and bring them all back safely, if only for your own satisfaction, and of course you also want to win the war. So the only other thing I'll show you is some of the components that the game supplies to help you out with the campaign. Now, campaigns can be very long if you want them to be. You can literally play dozens and dozens of missions if you want a campaign. So there are counters that allow you to remind yourself that you've promoted men, what their function within the squad is. In addition to recording their new values on the roster sheet as an aide-memoire when you're actually playing the battles, because you don't want to keep flicking back to a sheet when you're busy trying to fight a battle. That's not very helpful at all. There are these really useful counters, and Upfront provided an awful lot of these so that you can simply lay them on top of the values of the unit card just so that you can see at a glance what the up-to-date values are for that particular man. And yes, if you were wondering, it is possible for ratings to go down as well as up. So let's say that Private Nosenko proves to be a bit of a chicken and routs during an engagement. The penalty for routing is that you lose any of your accumulated Elan points. And after a time, if you continue to not do well, your morale and panic ratings begin to suffer. And if you get to the stage where both ratings are reduced all the way down to 0, you're considered KIA, because whether you catch a bullet or the poor fellow's been reduced to a gibbering wreck who just can't do this anymore, either way, he's out of the picture. So there's a very clever mechanism in there that actually models the deterioration some men undergo from continuous combat stress. I don't think there's anything else I need to cover. I don't want to dwell on the possibility that I might suffer losses, because Comrade Stalin doesn't like that kind of talk. But I'll just say that in addition to the basic mechanism for replacements, let's say I lose a rifleman, the rules require me to replace him with any other chap who happens to be carrying a rifle. That's fine. But if you get to a point where you've suffered a loss that you can't immediately replace from someone who's available on the list, then you have to resurrect a previously killed guy, but there's a victory point penalty for that. You suffer a deduction from your campaign victory points. And it's even more pronounced. The fellows who are marked with a T are either squad leaders or assistant squad leaders. And if you have to bring them back, then it becomes expensive. You lose 7 victory points every time that happens to you. Now, in a long campaign where you're playing, I don't know, 9 or 10 scenarios in a row, that may not be so devastating, but in my case, where I'm only playing 2, it could be a game changer. So I mentioned that I'm playing the 2 missions, but effectively it's 3 battles because elite troops on the attack is played as a 2-parter. In part 1, the elite German troops crash into my outer crust of highly inexperienced conscript troops. Now, normally in that scenario, once the Germans have either won the battle or been defeated, in which case the conscripts sigh with relief at the fact that they've won, but once the Germans win the first engagement, the Russian player receives an entirely new batch of conscripts to form a second line, effectively, which the surviving German elite troops then have to crash through in order to win the scenario overall. So effectively, the defending player gets double the number of soldiers. Now, I'm not going to stick to that because I see the engagement being modelled where the Germans are really driving hard through the early part of August 1942 to get to the Volga. There's going to be no let up. So if my squad is defeated in round 1 of the elite troops on the attack battle, I will simply rally my survivors and make a stand with whoever's left. If my squad is broken, then so be it. I will have to take some replacements. But if I end up withdrawing with most of my squad intact, then I'll fight with whoever's left. The second scenario I'm going to pick is going to be the very basic a meeting of patrols, because in the wake of the German breakthrough, I just want to simulate a small party of fairly disorganized Russians doing what they can to try and stop the German spearhead. Now, of course, historically, the Germans didn't reach the Volga until the 23rd of August. So I am playing the very early days, but for me as the Russian player, this is very much going to be an experience of being almost contemptuously swept aside and overwhelmed. But I'm hoping that in my own small squad-sized way, despite the fact that the front in general was collapsing, I would like my fellows to make their stand and give the Germans maybe one bloody nose on the road to Stalingrad. Now, I know there were a few that they suffered on the way in, but nothing that seriously hampered their momentum too much, not when you're looking at a front level picture. But I'm going to see how I do. So wish me luck. I'd appreciate any comments, suggestions. Now, I am going to, of course, play through the battles, but I'm also aware that I have done playthroughs concerning Upfront already on this channel. So in terms of playthroughs of the entire battle, there won't be anything in terms of game mechanics, I don't think, that you haven't seen before. So if any of you have a preference, please let me know in the comments whether you would like to watch the full battles as they unfold, or whether you'd rather I just present an abbreviated after-action report and focus this series of videos mainly on showing you how the campaign roster works and how you go updating it both during and after each battle. Let me know either way. I will proceed on the assumption that you want to watch the battles, but if you'd rather a quick trot through, then that's fine. I'm equally happy with either. I know I'm going to enjoy this challenge tremendously. So there we go, an introduction to campaigns in Upfront. It's going to be a short one, but I hope it's going to be a good one. And I will be playing my first battle perhaps towards the end of this week or early next week. We'll have to see how it goes. As ever, thank you very much for watching. I hope that this has proven useful and interesting to those of you who, like me, are massive upfront adherents, or those who simply would like to learn more about this game. A big hello to my regulars. It's always great to have you guys along for the ride. And to anyone who's wandered into the channel for the first time and seen this video, a big welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining me. And I hope I'll see all of you again soon. Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.